If you want to recreate the fabulous wide skirts of the 1950s, you absolutely have to have a petticoat, because without a petticoat, you can make the fullest 50s skirt with all that fabric and it will kind of droop. So the petticoat holds that skirt away from your body and creates that shape, as we see with Miss Maisel. She's wearing that fabulous red dress. Hello, and as you can see, the dogs are back. They told me you'd missed them. So I haven't always been very good about remembering to tell you what I'm wearing. But today, I'm wearing the blouse I made a few videos ago. It's from a 1940s pattern with 1940s cotton rayon mixed fabric in glorious colourful floral print that was so popular in the early 40s. And it was one of the blouses I made in collaboration with Janine Spender, that wonderful blouse pattern from the Vintage Sewing Pattern Company, where there's like 5 different versions that you can make, and we made them all. And then I'm also wearing, actually I'll just adjust that. So a couple of people asked me some I wore this turban about where I got it from, and I got it from Alice Brown's Cupboard. I'll link her details below. She's on Instagram, and she does quite a few of these style of turbans with this little fan shape on top, very cute, and ones with little kind of knotted bits. Do keep meaning to do a video on making turbans. Come up one day. And then I'm also wearing 1940s cotton crochet gloves. I love those. But today I'm going to show you the making of a 1950s petticoat, and the reason I'm kicking off the Mrs Maisel season with the petticoat is because if you put on a 1950s dress without a petticoat, as I'm going to show you later, all that fabric that you've made that lovely full skirt with will tend to just sort of droop. So in the 50s, they wore petticoats to hold their skirts out and create that hourglass shape. The idea of the petticoat was not that it should be not seen in the sense of drooping beneath your dress, but when you were out dancing, like swing dancing, as you twirled, the ruffles of the petticoat would show. So there are evening or rockabilly petticoats that are very ruffled and have a lot of net ruffles, and the pattern I considered was this one. I don't think that's quite the thing, no. And that's perfect for the evening rockabilly look with all the layers of net ruffle. But the one I actually decided to make, because I'm going to be wearing many daytime dresses, was this tiered petticoat, which is Simplicity 8456, which looks quite similar to a 1970s sort of dwindle skirt, doesn't it? But actually the lowest tier is like, I'll show you later, it's really long, so very roughly, and I thought I'll try that with a true vintage 50s dress, and if I want it any fuller, then I can always add another tier to the hem. And this is indeed what they did in the 50s to achieve that shape. So around the waist and hip area where you wouldn't want more fullness, the petticoats were quite close fitting, and then as the layers go down, so in the tiered version that I'm going to do, the middle layer is gathered but not that gathered, whereas the lowest layer is really gathered to create a really full ruffle. And if you wanted even more ruffliness to extend your skirt out at the hemline, you would just add layers of ruffles to that lower tier. So the Vogue pattern of 1955, actually that is part of the pattern, that there are 3 tiers and you add them to 3 different stitching lines, so that the top tier actually overlaps and hits the hemline of the lower tiers. And something else I should say about sewing a 50s petticoat is that all the fabric for this petticoat cost me £16, and I still have some left over, and it was a really pretty pure 100% cotton eyelet fabric, so perfect for petticoats. And if you look on the internet to buy a petticoat, there'll definitely be more than that, I guess, unless you buy from Shein or something, but otherwise they will be more than that, and not made in such a nice fabric. So they are quite simple to make, and making your own is definitely economic and worthwhile and quite fun too. And this is the eyelet cotton fabric that I chose, and as you can see, it's a nice soft white. And I'm starting by stitching the front and back skirt yoke pieces together all the way down the right side, and then just part of the way down the left side, as there'll be an opening on the left side. And I'm doing French seams, so I'm stitching wrong side to wrong side first, and then turning, pressing and stitching right side to right side. And then I'm setting my sewing machine to the longest stitch, because I'm going to do 2 lines of running stitch to gather the top edge of the upper tier, that's kind of in the middle of the petticoat, and I'm doing 2 lines of this long gathering stitch within the seam allowance. And this is the skirt yoke, which you can see is left open at the left, because that's where the opening and fastening is going to be. And then I have the French seam on the right side of the yoke, as you can see just there. And then I'm going to attach the upper tier of the petticoat to the skirt yoke of the petticoat, first of all matching the side seams, and then pulling up the gathering threads to fit that upper tier onto the skirt yoke. And I've just put a pin in the front piece of the skirt yoke just to help me know which is the front and which is the back. And then I'm just pinning the upper tier to the skirt yoke, having pulled up the gathering threads to fit. Using my long glass-headed pins, I was asked the other day to haberdashery why glass-headed pins as opposed to plastic ones, and I said, oh, because plastic ones melt if you iron them. And the lady at the counter said, well, I don't iron over pins. And I thought, no, well, I don't iron over pins. And then, when I was doing this petticoat, I used just one plastic headed pin, and I ironed over it, and it melted. So there'll forever be a mini orange dot somewhere on this petticoat. And then I'm joining the 4 sections of the lower tier together with French seams. And I just wanted to give you an idea of how much fabric is in the lower tier of the petticoat to form a good ruffle. I thought I'd show you this way, but looking at it now, I've almost created an advert. It looks like an advert for loo roll, doesn't it? Is that just me? Anyway, there was an awful lot of fabric in that lower tier. And then, of course, it all needs to be gathered to be joined onto the central tier. So I set the machine to the longest stitch again and stitched 2 rows of running gathering stitch within the seam allowance. And when you gather a long strip of fabric like this, this is made up of different sections joined by seams, it's important to stop the gathering stitch just before each new seam, because you won't be able to pull up the gathering threads over a seam. So I'm stopping and starting each side of each seam. This is a really straightforward project, and I thought it would be quite quick, but it wasn't. But it was quite straightforward. There were no moments of agony, so I must be grateful for that. And then it was time to pull up all the gathers of the lowest tier in order to fit it onto the middle tier. And this wasn't really an exact science. I just pulled up all the gathers on each of the sections between the seams, and I pulled them up quite tightly, and while you can see my friend relax. And once the measurements were the same, which did take a little bit of fiddling, I was able to pin the lowest tier of the petticoat onto that middle tier. You can see how much of it there was. And of course I made sure to get the gathers as even as possible all the way round, using, of course, glass-headed pins. I've learned my own lesson. And then to finish, it was time to stitch through all those gathers to join the central tier to that lowest tier. And then it was time to do lots of hemming, lots and lots of hemming. But luckily I really like hand stitching, and like most people in the vintage sewing community, I'm actually glued to Transatlantic on Netflix at the moment. Though look at me, it's no wonder I never know what's going on with anything. I forget to look at the screen or indeed listen for minutes at a time, but I do look up when someone's wearing something interesting. So the petticoat is finished, and I put a little double layer right along the hem there, and I think the fabric looks really pretty, but I thought the best way to show the effect would be to show a true vintage 50s dress, this one, which currently doesn't have the petticoat underneath, and you can see it's perfectly acceptable. It's just a bit of a modern shape. I mean, my overall shape, I am wearing 1950s underwear except for the lack of petticoat. And now we'll see the same dress with the petticoat. I'm just putting on gloves because, of course, in the 1950s, everybody wore a nice little pair of white or cream, mainly, gloves. And you can see that the petticoat just holds the skirt out a little. I think I might actually starch this petticoat, because although there is a definite difference, I actually wouldn't mind a little bit more floofiness. That's what people say, isn't it? A bit more floofiness in the skirt, but the petticoat is definitely helping to create that 50s shape. And I'm also wearing a little late 40s, 50s green straw hat with a white decoration, and the true vintage dress is of a green and white stripe, and that's just showing you, that little inset is showing you the dress without the petticoat, just to give you a chance to compare the two. And then I was going to show you the effect of the petticoat with another true vintage 50s dress, but things went awry, as you will soon see. So this dress, had things not gone awry, would have shown the effect quite well because of those rather wonderful horizontal stripes. So as I'm going to end on a note of hilarity and disaster, I'll just ask you now, if you haven't subscribed, that would be lovely. And please remember to like this video too. And yeah, I just thought I'd show you what really goes on. And then I think, what is that rose stem doing hanging over the foreground? I'll move that. And the moment my back is turned, that dead leaf with a snail pops into view. And I just wanted to add quickly, because I know some of you knitters will be wondering about this jumper, and it was knitted by the fabulous Linda of Knitting for Victory from an original 1940s pattern that you can see here in original 3-ply wool in the same powder blue.